She begged for a job. Every door closed until she was forced to offer her body.
Corliss Station had once been a functional mining hab, buried into the lattice of iron-rich asteroids trailing the edge of a collapsed gas giant. Now it was mostly hollow infrastructure, aging domes patched with uneven plating, pressure seals that hissed faintly when walked too close to, and dozens of sectors collapsing in economic rot. On Level 3, Sector D, a long corridor stretched between two flickering overhead panels. The vents exhaled a cold, recycled gust that carried the scent of corroded aluminum and mildew. It had been 4 days since Arisa had eaten a full meal. She adjusted the half-zip jacket clinging to her shoulders, worn smooth at the elbows and sealed with mismatched magnetic clips down the front. One sleeve was missing entirely, exposing the skin of her right arm to the chill, lavender-toned flesh broken by faint, glowing throat whirls that pulsed blue whenever she tensed. Her breath came out pale in the cold. Her sandals, cracked at the sides, slapped quietly against the plated floor as she walked. Her ID chip had expired 6 cycles ago. Arisa had once worked textiles on Zalvin 12, hand-weaving thermoplastic fiber composites into breathable climate wraps, but that station had failed. Power grid collapsed, water rations seized, and her permit was deactivated during relocation. She was now 32 days into an emergency stay on Corlith, a station already overwhelmed with unemployed migrants and oxygen garden shortages. She wasn't here for herself. Her younger brother, Kale, was 10 standard years old, underweight. Respiratory sensitivity flagged on his medical scan. She had placed him in a communal shelter in Sector D, where he was given 2 meal tokens a day and 1 emergency bunk between rows of stacked children. The last time she visited, his lips were pale. He had not smiled. She had to get a job. Any job. Something that would let her keep him warm, fed, and with her again. At base 17, she paused under the wall-mounted interface. Her finger hovered, then pressed the call request. The screen blinked red. A scanning beam passed over her collarbone. A robotic voice followed. Labor registry code expired. Access denied. Contact Civic Allocation Board for appeal. She stepped back from the door. Looked up. The camera lens swiveled, tracked her a moment, then reset. She moved on. Bay 18 was a drone service hub, power cells, and panel cleans. She pressed the chime. No answer. Bay 19, vent system diagnostics. A man in coveralls eyed her from behind a pallet loader. Registry chip? He asked. She shook her head. It expired. I haven't had time to. No ID, no clearance. Try someone else. I'll work under anyone. Off record. He looked away. That's a good way to get both of us flagged. Don't come back. She exhaled slowly, trying to keep her composure. Arisa's joints ached from walking. Her left heel had split skin where the sandal's edge had dug in. She limped slightly now. Her arms curled around herself as she moved through the next hallway, its lights dimmed due to energy rationing. Somewhere overhead, a pressure duct rattled loose in the ceiling. At Sector G's intake alley, the atmosphere changed. Neon signage flickered in loops overhead, most of it broken or blank. A loud vent purged steam to the left, briefly drowning the corridor in white fog. This was where they sent the overflow. Migrants, unskilled temp holders, anyone they didn't want visible. Arisa stepped into the alley. A pair of men stood ahead, leaning against a metal sidewall near a cargo shutter. One wore a hazard yellow vest, partially unzipped to show a stained shirt underneath. His boots were unlaced. The other smoked a stim stick, his eyes already fixed on her before she was halfway down the corridor. She slowed. She'd been here yesterday. She knew what they wanted. "You looking for work?" the man in the vest called out. "I've already asked you," she said. "And you walked off. Now you're back." "I'm not here for that," she said. He pushed off the wall, slowly. "There's no clean shifts left. Not for unlicensed siren. That's just how it is." The stim stick man exhaled smoke through his nose. "There's one way. You warm someone's bunk. Maybe they put your name down for vent cleaning. Maybe not." Arisa didn't respond. Her throat glowed, faintly, shame, tension. "We're just trying to help you earn," the man said, spreading his arms. Her jaw clenched. Her fingers trembled slightly at her sides. She tried to step past, but the vest-wearing foreman moved into her path. "Don't be rude now. We're giving you a choice most don't get." She stood still, her hands clenched into fists. She could feel it, Kale's face in her mind. The way he'd looked the last time, eyes rimmed red. His voice too soft to carry. The words slipped out, barely audible. "If I stay with you tonight, will you add my name to the shift board?" Her voice cracked halfway through. The silence that followed stretched. The foreman smiled slowly, as if confirming what he'd already assumed. "That's more like it." But then a third voice cut in. "Calm, male, controlled. That won't be necessary." Arisa turned her head sharply. A man stood at the edge of the alley. Human, light skin, lean build, a long graphite-colored coat layered over work gear, modular pockets strapped to his hips. A slate hung at his side, switched off. His gloves were tucked under one arm, resin stains still fresh on the fingertips. His eyes moved from a foreman to Arisa and back. Not aggressively, not even angry, just focused. He spoke again. Section 14-7C of the Civic Labor Bylaws. Offers made under duress render all associated contracts non-compliant. I'm logging this conversation now. He lifted a small scanning pad from his belt and tapped it once. The screen lit green. The foreman shifted. "Who the hell are you?" "Calendor. Habitat Restoration Archivist. Licensed under Sustainability Charter 3. The man in the hazard vest lowered his arms. "You don't run hiring here." "No, but I log structural materials from failed sectors. I'm authorized to take on assistance. If I say she works with me, she works with me." There was a pause. Then the stim-stick man laughed. "Fine, take her. Good luck." The two men turned, muttering, and walked back toward the opposite corridor. When they were gone, silence returned. Arisa stood frozen, shoulders trembling slightly. Her throat glowed in a slow pulse. She looked at the human. "What do you want?" He looked directly at her. "Nothing. You need work. I need help documenting greenhouse degradation patterns." "That's it. I'm not a charity case." "You're not. I'm offering a shift." "Why me?" "You're still standing after crossing this sector without food, shelter, or help. That matters." She didn't answer. Her body ached. Her pride hurt more. He gestured toward the corridor behind him. "You can say no, but if you follow me, I'll show you where I work. You could decide from there." He turned and began to walk. Arisa stayed still a long second. Her heart thudded. She could still turn around, find somewhere dark, and crawl into herself. Pretend she hadn't been humiliated. But Kale wouldn't get better on hope alone. Her legs moved. Slowly, she followed. Not because she trusted him, but because he hadn't taken anything. And he hadn't asked her to give anything but her hands and her time. Behind them, the intake alley lights kept flickering. The station didn't care if she disappeared into one more corridor. But for the first time in weeks, she wasn't walking away empty-handed. She wasn't walking alone. The corridor beyond Sector G narrowed quickly, dimming to a low amber hue cast from wall-mounted lumen strips, half of which flickered intermittently. Water condensation trailed along exposed insulation cables overhead, dripping into rust-stained floor channels. Arisa followed at a cautious distance, each footstep echoing off the corroded metal panels. Her calves burned with each step. Her shoulders were tight, half from cold, half from holding herself too upright for too long. Calendor walked ahead with practiced calm. His movements were deliberate, precise. He didn't talk, didn't turn around. He carried a shoulder-slung tool case made from pressed salvage fiber, and the slate on his hip occasionally blinked with soft blue notifications. Whatever he wasn't another shift foreman. After several turns and a long incline ramp, they reached an old pressure gate with an override panel attached by wires that looked decades older than safety code. Callan scanned his badge, entered a passphrase, and waited. The seal disengaged with a low vacuum hiss, and a faint breath of warmer air spilled out. Arisa hesitated at the threshold. This part of the station was off-grid. She could tell by the smell. Old oxygen vines, mold suppression gas, and aged polymers mixed in the air. No loud machines. No foot traffic. No surveillance eyes above the doorframe. She finally asked, quietly, "This isn't an assigned labor section, is it?" Callan glanced at her. "No. Decommissioned hydroatrium. Charter approved for research. Nobody comes down here." She frowned. "Then why bring me here?" "Because I work alone, and it's safer when no one watches what I grow." He stepped through. She followed. The hydroatrium had once been a controlled growth chamber, part of the oxygen renewal project. Now was dim and quiet, sealed off from the main network. Cracked glass ribs arced overhead, partially covered in calcium scale. Some sections were still intact, others missing entirely. Moonlight blue biolumin strips lined the base of the central garden troughs, revealing rows of dormant planters choked with dust and moss. But in one corner, beneath a reconstructed canopy of broken panels, was a living patch of green. Oxygen vines, real ones, thin-leafed and shimmering under the artificial light. They were staked against fiber supports, their roots embedded in moist substrate rehydrated with recycled water. A slow-dripping condensation tube fed them, drop by drop. There were only 2 rows, maybe 4 meters wide, but they breathed. She could feel the temperature difference standing near them. Arisa stared, stunned. She hadn't seen living oxygen plants outside a sealed civic dome in over a year. Callan finally broke the silence. "These came from an archived seed vault. I cross-referenced their stress response data with the age of the containment membranes. I log how they rebuild microclimates." "You grow illegal oxygen?" she asked flatly, unsure if this was a trap. "No," he said calmly. "I preserve it, and I test restoration viability." Her eyes narrowed. "You said I'd be helping. What exactly do you want from me?" He stepped past her and gestured to a small alcove where scanning tools were stacked. Fiber resonance tappers, resonance echo boards, moisture meters, polymer decay trays, documenting microfracture patterns in the surrounding infrastructure. Tactile calibration. You'd help me detect weak ceramic seams. "You said you worked in textiles?" She nodded slowly. "Good finger sensitivity," he said. "Perfect for harmonic tap work." She didn't reply, but her posture eased slightly. Her fingers flexed at her sides unconsciously. He didn't ask for more. For several minutes, they moved through the chamber in silence. He showed her how to run a fingertip tap down a cracked beam and listen for the change in echo. Where the pitch dropped, the fracture widened. Where it sharpened, the ceramic retained stress. Arisa listened, watched. Then she tried. Her hands trembled slightly, part cold, part hunger, but her motions were precise. She had woven microweave composites on a trembling platform under pressurized suits before. Her body remembered. Tap, slide, listen. Tap, pause, check. "You hear that?" he asked. She tilted her head. "Yes, right here. The resonance dips, left side." Callan leaned in, nodded. "Exactly. That's an internal delamination." She caught herself almost smiling. But then her body reminded her. She was still starving. Still cold. Still hadn't seen her brother in 3 days. Still wearing a jacket one wind sheer away from falling apart. Her throat pulse flickered again, this time in anxiety. What was the catch? As if sensing the shift, Callan stepped back. "I don't want anything from you but honest work," he said. "And I won't report your expired license. I don't care about the civic board." "You should," she said. "They find people for unregistered help. Detain them. Not under heritage charter protocols. They won't risk closing a project tied to habitat viability testing." She searched his face. There was no leer, no hunger, no pity either. Just focus. Patience. After a long silence, she asked, "Why do you do this alone?" Callan looked past her at the vines, his voice quieter now. "I tried doing this with a civic team. Bureaucracy killed the whole thing. Budget pulled. No follow-through. I kept going. Someone has to. And you're just letting me help? I'm not doing you a favor. You're not a problem to fix. But if you want to earn your place, I can give you that." Arisa didn't say thank you. She wasn't ready to trust this yet. But her breath finally slowed. Her muscles loosened enough to stop shaking. She moved toward the ceramic beam again. Tapped. Listened. corrected her angle. Behind her, the storm outside rattled against the old outer hull, but she barely heard it. Her focus had returned. So had a reason to keep going, if only for another day. Then, a soft alarm beeped from Callan's slate. He walked to the wall panel, scanned the readout. Pressure fluctuation, secondary conduit, seal rupture risk. He opened a tool compartment, grabbed 2 resin cartridges. I need hands. Come on. Arisa didn't hesitate. They moved as one into the connecting maintenance hall, boots clicking against the cold composite floor. No time for small talk. The corridor narrowed, and up ahead, steam hissed through a growing crack in the polymer lining. She passed him a resin patch as he peeled back a thermal seal. Her fingers, steadier than his in tight spaces, pressed the sealant flat while he activated the heating wand. Together, they stopped the bleed. Only when it was done did she notice his gloves were wet, coated in condensation and sealant. And only then did she realize his hands had trembled slightly. Not from stress, from spores. He had inhaled them earlier. She'd seen him working near a fungal patch without a mask. Her voice was sharp now. How long were you near the growth chamber? Callan blinked slowly, his face pale. Half an hour, maybe longer. You need clean air. I'll be fine. No, you won't. He staggered slightly as she stepped forward and put her arm under his. He didn't resist. She guided him to a side shaft, opened a runway tunnel, and helped him up the ladder. The climb was slow. He coughed twice, deep dry. Arisa's throat glow brightened as she focused her breath, recalling a method from her childhood. Siren had always guided 6 siblings through low-atmo caverns with light alone. Visibility, calm rhythm. The glow helped. They reached the access point. Fresh, filtered air drifted in. Callan inhaled. His hands steadied. They didn't speak for a long while. When he finally looked at her, it wasn't with gratitude. It was with something heavier. Respect. That night, they slept in the same chamber under a thermal tarp strung between a pair of cracked beams. Separate sides. Shared silence. No demands. No touches. Only warmth passed between them in slow degrees. For Arisa, the offer she'd made in the alley wasn't forgotten, but now it lived in a different memory. Not something she'd been forced to give, but something she had been allowed to withhold, and still been valued. The light in the atrium shifted from amber to soft white as Corliss Station's circadian spool advanced to the next cycle. Simulated daylight filtered weakly through the fractured overhead panels, casting thin rays over the metal flooring and catching on the floating pollen motes drifting above the microgarden. It was warmer here than most sectors, a delicate balance kept alive by Callan's careful calibration of airflow vents and recycled heat from adjacent maintenance ducts. Every degree mattered. Arisa woke first. She sat up under the thermal tarp slowly, her muscles stiff, her limbs reluctant to respond. Her thermo body sheath clung to her skin where condensation had formed during sleep. Across from her, Callan still rested, curled on his side with one arm tucked beneath his head. His breathing was quiet, controlled. His skin looked less pale now. He'd recovered well from the spore exposure the night before. She studied him for a moment. Human, but not like the others she'd met. Not transactional, not curious in the wrong way. He hadn't asked her where she was from. He hadn't asked why her license was expired. He hadn't even looked at her body in that evaluating way most men on Corlith did. He had only watched her hands, measured their usefulness, and that, more than anything, made her suspicious. Suspicion wasn't mistrust. It was survival. And in her experience, too much kindness meant someone would eventually ask for repayment. Quietly, she stood. The floor was cold under her bare feet, but she moved quickly to the storage alcove where Callan had left the survey equipment. She found the tapper tool she'd used the day before in a coil of fiber tracing line. She worked alone for the next hour, documenting hairline fractures along the northern beam, logging resonance anomalies, and resetting 3 cracked struts that had partially delaminate. Her fingers, though stiff, remembered the rhythm. She didn't do it to impress him. She did it because it gave her a reason to stay. When Callan stirred and sat up, he didn't speak right away. He watched her from across the atrium as she finished calibrating a moisture sensor. You didn't have to start without me, he finally said. I couldn't sleep, she replied. He stood, rubbing a hand over his face before slipping on his gloves. Still, thank you. That saves us half a cycle. She straightened, glanced at him, then looked away. I figured if I stopped moving, I'd think too much. You can talk if you want. No. The silence stretched. Then she added, softer, my brother's name is Kale. He's 10. He's in the communal shelter. Callan nodded slowly. You mentioned him before. He doesn't know what I've been doing to try and feed him. He thinks I'm on a work detail. Every time I visit, I lie. You're trying to keep him safe. She met his eyes. No, I'm trying to keep his hope intact. If he knew the truth, how many doors closed, how many times I almost... She stopped. Her throat glow flickered with restraint. Hope is sometimes the only thing they let you keep. Callan didn't interrupt. He simply stood there, waiting for her to decide what came next. She inhaled through her nose, steadied herself. Why are you really doing this? You're not just logging greenhouse fractures. This, she gestured toward the vines, the equipment, the notes stacked near the support arch. This isn't salvage work. It's preservation, legacy work. But you're not on any civic roster I've seen. Callan adjusted the sleeve of his coat. I was born on Burren 4. It was one of the first orbital habitats to try open-source environmental rebuilding after the collapse. My parents were part of the first Civilian Engineers Guild. They died in a supply riot when I was 17. Arisa didn't speak. He continued. I stayed behind, learned to maintain what they built. I cataloged what they left. I've been doing the same thing on every station I've been assigned to. But the boards don't care about history. They want numbers, metrics, efficiency. This work, he motioned to the growing vines, the root-stabilized planters, doesn't show fast results. It's not flashy. It's too slow for funding. So I stopped reporting to them. You're blacklisted? He nodded once, unofficially, but I stay below detection. I keep moving. I restore what I can. I try not to let things fall completely apart. Arisa lowered her eyes. She understood that feeling too well. A chime interrupted them. Not a loud one, just a soft rhythmic tone coming from the far wall. Callan crossed the atrium and tapped the panel beside a communications relay. His brow furrowed. What is it? Arisa asked. Sector Registry is flagging a mobile ID scan. Someone filed an enforcer complaint. Said an unlicensed siren female was seen trespassing near labor storage. They flagged it as loitering, possibly subversive. She went still, her body locked up. The foreman. Maybe. She took one step back toward the door. I need to leave. You can't. The mag sleds are already dispatched. They're on ceiling rail systems. They'll check every open corridor between here and the public commons. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then hide me. He looked around the atrium, thinking. Arisa moved without asking toward the nutrient racks on the west wall. Thin nutrient film sheets hung like translucent curtains, feeding root webs that dangled from the upper struts. She crouched behind them, hands bracing the wall, eyes alert. Callan followed, reached up, and lowered a curtain of condensation tubing around the edge, forming a cocoon of semi-transparency. The light outside the atrium dimmed. Then it pulsed. Metallic clacking echoed through the corridor outside. A whine. A mechanical glide. The sleds were coming. Arisa ducked lower, back pressed to the cold wall, breath hitching in her throat. Callan crouched next to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth from his side. She didn't look at him. A cone of white light pierced the film, sliding across the nutrient curtain, cutting through the pollen-laced air. It passed inches from her feet. Her breath caught. She was about to move when Callan reached out, one gloved hand covering her mouth gently, not forcefully, just enough to keep her quiet. Her eyes met his. There was no fear in his face, only absolute calm. The sled light hovered, moved again, scanned toward the broken glass arch, then receded. Clacking resumed. Then nothing. Silence. The tension ebbed slowly. Callan lowered his hand. She exhaled into her palm. Her throat glow-dimmed from bright blue to a faint silver. I shouldn't have come here, she whispered. No, you shouldn't have been hunted for asking to work. Arisa turned away, hiding her face behind the curtain. The silence held. Then, after several seconds, her voice returned, quiet but steady. What happens if they come back? They'll expect you to run. If you don't, if you stay hidden, they'll assume someone else moved you off station. That won't hold long. No, he said, but long enough to finish our current work. Long enough to build something we can use as leverage. She tilted her head. Leverage? I've been documenting this habitat section for over a year. If we show them the results, if we prove oxygen restoration stability with live data and route viability, we can petition for a cooperative charter. You think they'll grant it? Not if I ask alone, he said, eyes steady on hers. But if you submit it as co-custodian, if they see your fingerprint on the scans, your breath signature on the log, they might. She stared at him. What do I have to lose? He added. She didn't answer, but her silence wasn't resistance anymore. They stayed under the condensation veil a moment longer, listening to the quiet atrium hum, before slowly rising and stepping out into the restored warmth of the derelict garden. She no longer felt like she was hiding. And for the first time in weeks, Arisa felt something she didn't recognize at first. It wasn't safety, it was purpose. The atrium lights cycled to emergency reserve. A low-frequency tone pulsed along the conduit runners beneath the floor, followed by a station-wide announcement in flat, synthesized speech. Environmental purge in progress. All non-essential sections will undergo automated sterilization. Please vacate maintenance sectors immediately. Callan looked up from the nutrient calibration slate. They're flushing a spillway. Arisa stood across from him, adjusting a small thermal wrap across her shoulders. Why now? Routine doesn't exist here, he muttered. They're responding to something. Could be the MagSled report. Could be a fake contamination flag. Either way, they'll purge adjacent sectors to force movement. Force us out. He nodded once. From behind the atrium walls, the pressure balance shifted, subtle but noticeable. The hissing sound of pumps reversing filled the silence. Arisa could feel the recycled air becoming denser, heavier. In a few minutes, the overflow drainage tunnels would release stored wash water laced with sanitizing chemicals. If they were caught inside, they'd be swept down pressure slopes and flushed into the lower waste sectors. We can't stay here, Callan said. Where? He opened a storage panel and pulled out 2 utility packs. There's an auxiliary rung tunnel beyond the spillway exit, but it's on the far side of the purge flow. Arisa didn't hesitate. She slid the scanning slate into her hip pouch and tightened the wrap around her torso. Then we move. Now, they crossed the atrium quickly, navigating through the root-fed planters and ceramic ribs, ducking beneath broken lattice frames still hanging from the ceiling. The air was thick now, pollen stirred by the shifting pressurization, drifting like dust in slow spirals. Arisa's throat glow pulsed softly, guiding the way as they passed into the maintenance corridor. The spillway was a sloped tunnel of curved metal, pitted and slick with old grime. It dipped downward at a shallow angle, leading to a central vent channel wide enough to walk through upright. At the far end, a hatch with corrosion around the seal marked their exit. They didn't get halfway before the purge began. A deep metallic thud vibrated through the walls. Red hazard strobes activated along the ceiling, casting the corridor in bursts of pulsing light. Then came the water, rushing from a valve above them, spilling in through the grated vents with growing force. Go! Callan yelled. They ran. Arisa's bare feet slapped hard against the slick surface, each step sending cold spray up her legs. The spill water wasn't hot, but it wasn't clean either. Chemical traces bit at her exposed skin. Behind them, the surge thickened. Callan reached the vent latch first. He pulled at the handle. It jammed. Lock! Arisa shoved past him, crouched, and pushed her fingers into the exposed edge panel. The release mechanism was buried deep, meant for maintenance techs with full tools. She reached anyway, breath catching, muscles tensed. Her double-jointed fingers slid through the gap, twisting against the cold metal until she felt the internal bolt. She turned it. The latch snapped open. Callan yanked the hatch wide just as water slammed into their backs, forcing them through the threshold together. They landed hard, Callan on one knee, Arisa against his shoulder, soaked and gasping. The hatch slammed shut behind them, locking the water out with a dull echo. Arisa leaned against the wall, panting. Her body sheath was soaked through. Her thermal wrap had come undone, trailing behind like a dead limb. Callan was just as wet, his gloves dripping, coat sagging with weight. He shook out his arms, winced. She turned toward him. "Are you hurt?" "No, just cold. Take that off before it pulls your back out." Callan hesitated, then nodded. He peeled off his coat, wrung it out, and folded it into a tight bundle. She followed suit, unfastening the wet mesh from her hips and squeezing it dry. Her body trembled from the adrenaline and sudden drop in temperature. Their eyes met again. No words passed between them. Then the low hum of mag rails vibrated through the corridor. Arisa froze. Callan's expression sharpened. They're redirecting patrol. They're tracking the flow. They think someone escaped through this section. He scanned the corridor. There's one place we can hide. They moved into the far end of the tunnel, a recessed storage shaft housing deactivated nutrient loops and hanging root mats, remnants from a failed hydro experiment. The mats were thick, draped in tangled, fibrous growths, and veiled with nutrient film membranes. "Inside," he said, "I'll cut the vent later. It'll give us time." Arisa slipped behind the first curtain of translucent biofilm. It was warm here, humid but breathable. The air smelled of soil and damp polymer. She crouched against the wall, pulling the film down over her. Callan slid in beside her. They were chest to shoulder now. The space was tight. Root strands brushed their skin, and every movement created soft creaks in the tension cables overhead. White light from an approaching mag sled shimmered through the film. Its search beam passed once, then again. She didn't breathe. Her chest felt tight. Callan slowly raised his hand, then gently pressed his gloved fingers over her lips, silencing her without pressure. Her eyes locked on his. His face was barely illuminated, but she could see it clearly, tense, composed, unreadable. Her throat glowed dimmed to a flicker. The sled passed. Then silence. Minutes slipped by. When the risk passed, Callan withdrew his hand. Arisa let out a slow breath against his palm. They didn't move yet. The silence between them was charged, not with fear, but something quieter. Vulnerability. Her eyes flicked down. She noticed how his other hand trembled slightly again, not from spores this time, but chill. She reached under the film, took his hand in hers, and pressed it gently between her palms. He didn't speak. He didn't pull away. They sat like that, side by side in the damp quiet, tangled in artificial root mats and hidden from the world. The external threat hadn't passed. Their future was still uncertain. But in that moment, she wasn't alone. And for the first time, neither was he. The warm, veiled silence inside the root mat cradle didn't last. A sharp static pulse rang out over the station's emergency band, followed by a code-locked override signal. The mag sleds had relayed their search route. Corlith's wardens had authorized localized thermal sweeps. Callan moved first. They'll start scanning for body heat. This curtain won't stop that. Arisa nodded. Then we move before they get a reading. The tunnel ahead was narrow, barely wide enough for two bodies side by side. The exposed wall panels were cold and slick from lingering spillway moisture. The lights overhead were now set to emergency pulse mode. One flash every 3 seconds, long enough to show your shape but not your features. They moved quickly, barefoot and quiet. A maintenance stairwell curved upward toward a decommissioned air filtration channel. It hadn't been listed on the official schematics since before the First Civic Board pulled funding from hydro restoration. That was exactly why Callan trusted it. Halfway up, Arisa stumbled. Her heel caught the jagged seam of a step panel. She hissed in pain, dropping briefly to one knee. Callan turned, caught her elbow, supported her. "You're limping," he said. "It's fine. You're not fine." I said move. He didn't argue, but he slowed just slightly, keeping his body close to hers as they ascended. The air at the top of the stairwell was warmer. That was a bad sign. Air shouldn't be warm near the exhaust grid. Arisa touched the side of the wall. Her fingers came away damp and faintly sticky. Spores. Callan pulled his scarf up instinctively, but it was too late. He coughed once, sharply, then again. Arisa froze. How long? I'll be okay. You're already reacting. I've taken worse. He staggered. His hand caught the edge of a broken bracket, and he slumped to one side, shoulders rising with each labored breath. No, she said firmly. Not again. She crouched beside him, pushed her hand gently to the base of his neck to check for rising temp. His skin was flushed, hot against the chill in the air. His vision drifted for a second before locking on her again. There's a dehumidifier junction chamber, he rasped. 30 meters. Sealed air loop. Fresh. Show me. He pointed with trembling fingers, barely lifting his arm. Left, then up. Low duct. Takes a climb. She shifted him over her shoulder, supporting his weight. He wasn't heavy, but his limbs resisted her, half-conscious muscles bracing without coordination. Her own legs burned as she carried him through the narrow hall, ducking past old emergency signs half buried in grime. A low duct gaped ahead, rusted around the vent lip. She set him down just long enough to pull herself up through it, then reached back and helped drag him into the shaft. They crawled side by side through the duct's ribs, each breath echoing off metal. The dehumidifier chamber was just ahead. Arisa slid in first, found a manual override for the vent seal, and cracked it open. Fresh, filtered air spilled over her face, dry and oxygen-rich. She turned back. Callan had slumped against the duct wall, half-curled. His hands trembled now with fine, involuntary spasms. His body had started to shut down. No, she said again, crawling back to him. Her bioluminescent throat patterns brightened as she crouched over him, breathing slowly, deliberately. The glow intensified, guided by breath control, her species' natural response to stress navigation. She leaned closer, placing her hands along his face to steady him. Breathe with me, she whispered. He didn't respond. She exhaled again, slower, the glow increasing. The light caught on his eyelids. She placed one hand over his chest and one under the back of his neck, gently coaxing his body forward. His mouth opened weakly. She leaned closer still, her glow bathing his face in a soft violet-blue hue, the pattern pulsing in time with her own breaths. His chest rose. Then again, the panic started to fade from his features. She helped him into the chamber, closing the vent behind them. They collapsed together against the wall, the hum of filtered airflow surrounding them in a low mechanical lull. His head rested against her shoulder. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Eventually, his fingers brushed hers. Thank you, he whispered. I remember what it feels like, she said. To be dying and have no one. He looked up at her. You saved me. So we're even, she said. But her voice was quieter now, less defensive. She stood and moved to the far wall. I'll stay up until your vitals settle. Rest. We'll move when you can stand. I can move now. You'll pass out in the next corridor. He didn't argue, just lowered his head again. As she watched him settle, Arisa sat cross-legged at the edge of the chamber, leaning her head back against the wall, eyelids heavy. She realized something then. For the first time since she'd arrived on Corliss Station, she wasn't the one being rescued. She wasn't the one needing shelter. She had become someone else's sanctuary, and that changed everything. 2 cycles passed. The dehumidifier chamber, meant for temporary equipment staging, became their unofficial shelter. The air was clean. The venting was quiet. No patrols passed nearby. They took turns sleeping, eating ration pays from old reserves Callan had stockpiled, and drying out their gear with recycled thermal coils. Callan recovered slowly. The spore irritation faded with rest, though he still coughed in the mornings. Arisa monitored him closely, measuring each breath pattern, checking his color. She didn't say much about it, but she stayed close. On the 3rd morning, Callan stood without assistance. His coat, now dry and sealed with resin patches, hung straighter on his frame. He pulled on his gloves, flexed his fingers, and looked at her across the chamber. I'm going back, he said. The vines can't go more than 3 cycles without nutrient cycling. Arisa stood as well, already dressed. Her body sheath had been cleaned, restitched at the thigh where it had torn during the purge, and rewrapped with a scavenged fiber sash that kept her warm without impeding movement. Her jacket, still missing a sleeve, was reinforced with tape around the collar. "I'm coming with you," she said. No hesitation. They navigated the quieter maintenance corridors this time, avoiding flagged junctions and using secondary ducts Callan had memorized over months of solitary work. Arisa followed him, observing the way he moved now, still reserved but more open, less guarded. When they reached the atrium again, it was silent. The lights had dimmed to power-saving mode. The vines were still alive, but just barely. Several stalks had begun to wilt, leaves curling inward from dehydration. Without a word, Arisa dropped to one knee and began to stabilize the root webs. She cleared debris, reset the flow valves, and reconnected the condensation tube. Callan retrieved tools, reactivated the nutrient feed, and updated the growth tracking slate. They worked in total rhythm. For hours, they moved through the broken garden. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. She passed him instruments. He adjusted structural braces. She ran tactile resonance scans on cracked growth beds. He marked viable chambers for reseeding. Late into the cycle, the atrium regained its warmth. A soft, green scent filled the air, oxygen vines beginning to release breathable compounds again. The faint hiss of hydro uptake through the root mesh was a sound Callan hadn't heard in days. He looked over at her. Arisa was crouched in front of the central vine patch, checking leaf tension. Her fingers, long and double-jointed, moved delicately over the foliage, like she was tuning an instrument no one else knew how to play. "Your hands are good at this," he said quietly. "I used to work seed thread on Zalvin," she said without turning. "Fine work. Microweave repair. They made us do it with gloves at first. Then they took those away. Why? They said skin contact built pride. Discipline. But it was just to speed up the quotas." She moved to the next patch, knelt again. Her shoulders were tense, but her tone stayed neutral. "I got used to working by feel. I could tell the strength of a thread by the way it hummed when pulled. I started recognizing failure stress by touch alone." Callan watched her. "That's why you can hear fractures." She nodded once. "It's all the same in the end. Something's either sound or it's breaking." He knelt beside her, picking up a cracked rib panel. He ran his thumb over a line of embedded etching, faded notes left by some long-gone surveyor. Arisa noticed. "What are those?" she asked. "Structural signatures. Early civic planning used ceramic composite slabs like this. Most are undocumented now, but these hold memory etchings, notes, formulas, even names. It's history." She ran her fingers across one of the panels. "You restored dead things." Callan looked at her. "I try to make them breathe again." They held that moment between them. Neither moved. Neither looked away. Later that cycle, they ate side by side under a hanging thermal tarp rig between two intact beams. The humidity had returned. The air was warm enough for skin to dry. Arisa had unzipped the top of her body sheath slightly, letting her shoulders breathe. Her bioluminescent throat whorls glowed faintly in the low light. Not from danger or stress, but warmth. Callan sat across from her, coat folded beside him, undersuit sleeves pushed up. He sipped from a hydration pouch, glanced at her. "I've been alone for too long," he said. "So have I." He shifted slightly, his voice low. "The night we met, you made an offer you didn't want to make. I didn't answer it properly." "You didn't have to," she replied. "You gave me something else." Callan hesitated, then reached across and touched her hand, lightly, with just the edge of his fingers. "I don't want you to think I expect anything," he said. "But if you ever want to offer something by choice, I'll be here." Arisa didn't pull away. She studied his hand, then his face. Slowly, she turned her palm into his and let their fingers rest together. "I'm not ready," she said. "I know. I might be. Later. I'll wait." Their hands stayed joined. They didn't speak for the rest of the cycle. But when the thermal tarp rustled in the recycled wind, and the lights above dimmed toward rest mode, Arisa leaned against his shoulder. Not for support, not for survival. For closeness. For heat that didn't demand anything. That night, in the quiet of the reborn atrium, surrounded by oxygen vines and suspended light, Two people began to rebuild what no one else on Corliss Station had ever cared to preserve. Not just plants, not just breath, but dignity. The warning came without alarm. Just a sudden flicker across the overhead lighting grid, followed by a soft drop in temperature that spread through the atrium like a wave. Callan looked up from the nutrient slate. That's not good. Arisa stood at the east wall, her hands still pressed to a ceramic scan slab. She turned slowly. What is it? The grid just dropped to brownout reserve, Callan said. That only happens when there's a priority reroute, which means they're isolating a sector. He nodded. If they shut off our loop, the vines won't just dry out. The temperature differential will trigger pressure stress across the glass ribs. We could lose the entire chamber. She crossed to him. Is there a bypass? No, he said. Not inside, but there is a manual actuator panel on the outer ring on the hull skin. Arisa went still. You mean an exterior rung line? Yes. How far? 60 meters along the interior hull curvature. But it's exposed. No insulation. No gravity anchor. And the actuator is likely frozen in place. She processed that fast. You can't make that climb. You're still recovering. I can guide someone, he said quietly. From here, if I sync the NAV slate to the outer telemetry, I can talk you through it. She didn't hesitate. Prep the harness. Callan looked at her. Arisa, you saved this garden. You gave me something that wasn't a transaction. I'm not letting it die now. His jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't argue. Together, they moved. Callan retrieved the thin-scale EVA harness from a sealed kit box. It was designed for short-term maintenance walks, not prolonged exposure. Arisa climbed into it quickly, securing each mag seal, adjusting the lumbar tension strap and side clamps. She pulled her hair back, fastened the breathing valve over her mouth, and tested the slate uplink. Callan linked her readout to his console. I'll talk you through each turn. Just listen to my voice. Don't stop. Arisa stood at the pressure hatch, her face half lit by the strobe light, now pulsing across the atrium. The vines hissed behind them, unfed, gasping. Ready, she said. The hatch opened. The cold hit her like a wall. She stepped out onto the rung line, which curved slowly across the internal surface of the station's cylindrical hull. There were no full handrails, only anchor brackets spaced every 2 meters. Hazard strobes lit the corridor in long pulses of orange light, throwing shadows that warped with every breath she took. Frost had formed on the inner skin. The alloy beneath her feet vibrated, gently but constantly, under the strain of atmospheric pressure adjustment. Every few seconds, a deep groan echoed through the metal, like the station itself was bracing for collapse. Callan's voice came through the comm. Calm. Steady. Take it slow. Anchor every foot. Left hand, bracket 6. Good. Breathe shallow. Don't look down. I'm not, she replied, her teeth clenching. I'm not looking anywhere but forward. The cold pierced through her body sheath within 30 seconds. Her fingers numbed, even inside the thermoskin gloves. Each movement was deliberate. Hook the line, step, brace. Repeat. Then she saw it. The actuator, frozen solid, partially recessed behind a warped support beam. If she hadn't known exactly where to look, she would have missed it entirely. I see it, she said. Good, Callan replied. You'll need to clear the frost before you can reseat it. There's a utility blade in the left thigh strap. She reached for it, hands shaking now. Cut the frost away in short, controlled motions. The ice broke off in chunks, bouncing down into the unseen depths of the curvature below. Her breaths came faster. Her limbs wanted to stop, but she didn't stop. With the last of the frost gone, she wedged herself against the panel and pulled the actuator lever forward. It resisted. She leaned harder. Her arms shook. The harness groaned under the torque. It moved. Just enough. The slate chirped. Callan's voice came sharp through the comm. Power reroute detected. You did it. Arisa exhaled hard. Her eyes burned. Now come back. The return was worse. The cold had reached her core now. Her limbs moved sluggishly. Her grip weakened. Twice, her boots slipped, but the harness caught, held. Callan's voice never wavered. He guided her from bracket to bracket, counting meters, urging her through the final stretch. When she reached the hatch, her hand slipped off the latch twice before it finally disengaged. He was there. He pulled her in. The door sealed. She collapsed into him, body shaking violently, soaked in condensation, every muscle aching. He stripped the harness off her in pieces, careful not to jostle her too hard. Her jacket was half frozen. Her throat glowed dim and uneven. She blinked at him. Did it hold? He helped her sit. It held. The gardens stabilizing. She gave a soft laugh, then winced. Everything hurts. I know. He wrapped the thermal tarp around her, pulled her close against his chest. She didn't resist. Her fingers found his again. They stayed joined. Later that day, the station's civic board sent a field auditor. The power reroute had been flagged by system diagnostics, and the data logs tied to the actuator revealed the oxygen stabilization override. Callan's restoration files, long dismissed, were now unavoidable. The auditor reviewed the logs, checked the growth data, studied the chamber, and finally, without much ceremony, signed a provisional charter document. Cooperative Cultivation Designation, Heritage Class. Arisa's name was on it. So was Callan's. Weeks passed. The atrium became their work site. A real, legal one. They received seed, resupply authorization, nutrient rations, a small civic stipend. The vines grew. The air warmed. Kale arrived on the third week. Arisa met him at the sector tram platform, pulling him close in her arms as he stepped off the transport. He wore an oversized thermal poncho that trailed behind him like a cape. He looked thinner than she remembered, but he smiled. Later that night, Kale walked the atrium paths, his eyes wide. He reached out to touch the vines. It smells like home, he whispered. Arisa nodded. It will be. The final scene came days later. Arisa stood at the arch of the fully restored atrium, now clean and reinforced with new ceramic inlays. Her jacket had been replaced with a tailored utility coat, fitted to her body, its blue piping glowing softly in the garden light. Her throat markings glowed a healthy rhythm, balanced, calm. Callan stood beside her, a scant slate in one hand, his free fingers brushing hers as they stood together. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Behind them, vines breathed new air into Corliss Station. Ahead of them, life, real life, was finally beginning. The weeks turned into months. What began as a salvaged hydroatrium on the brink of collapse had grown into one of Corliss Station's few self-sustaining green sectors. The oxygen vines were stable. The new ceramic arch supports gleamed under full-spectrum lighting. Nutrient mist systems whispered overhead on an automatic timer. There were even bees now, imported micromite pollinators, humming between the flowers that bloomed along the edge of the vines. Arisa stood near one of the low planter beds, trimming back excess leaves. Her gloves were off. She preferred to work barehanded now. She said it helped her feel the pulse of the plants. But Callan suspected it was more than that. She'd begun standing straighter, smiling occasionally, wearing clothes that fit her not because someone gave them to her, but because she chose them. She wore a dark-fitted top with reinforced seams, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and narrow-leg work trousers tucked into clean thermal boots. Around her waist was the cobalt utility sash he'd given her, a new one, stitched from clean salvage fiber, not fraying at the edges like the old one had been. He watched her as he updated the growth matrix on his slate. He wasn't pretending to work. He was simply delaying the moment he'd wanted to ask her something for weeks. But today, Arisa turned first. Kale started asking why you're always near me, she said, walking over. Callan gave a slight smile. And what did you tell him? That I trust you. A pause. He lowered the slate. Do you? I do now, she said. I didn't think I would. I didn't think anyone on this station had earned it. But you did. The atrium was quiet. The fans had cycled off. Only the soft drip of condensation echoed under the ribbed glass ceiling. She stepped closer, slower than usual. Her body language had shifted, more open, not hesitant, choosing. Her voice was lower when she added, I know you never pushed. You waited. I noticed. He swallowed. I didn't want to treat you like anyone else ever had. You didn't. That's why I'm here now. She reached for his hand. He took hers gently, warm, firm. No rush. They left the main chamber and crossed into the small maintenance wing they'd converted into private quarters. The door sealed behind them. Kill had gone to rest hours earlier. The station was quiet. No alarms. No hunger. No searchlights. Inside the room, the lights were dimmed to a soft amber tone. The walls were insulated with matte ceramic sheets, a small heat coil embedded beneath the floor to keep the space comfortable. A thick thermal blanket had been spread across the pallet where they'd occasionally sat, read, or worked late into the cycles. It wasn't a luxury suite, but it was warm, clean, chosen. Callan turned to her. "If you want to stop here, I'll never ask again." "I'm not stopping," Arisa said softly. "Not this time." She moved first, unfastening the clip at her collar. The top slid away from her shoulders, slow and deliberate. Her skin shimmered slightly under the room's low light, her throat glowed, dimming to a soft violet rhythm. Not stress, not shame, just presence. Callan stepped toward her. No words now. He kissed her. Their bodies came together slowly. Nothing rushed, nothing taken. The months of restraint, of shared work and whispered nights beneath tarps and power outages had built something solid. Their touch wasn't frenzied. It was steady, discovering. He undressed her carefully, undoing each fastener with focus, exposing each inch of skin as if memorizing it. She helped him shed his outer layer, revealing the long lines of his frame, the lean muscle of someone who worked with tools, not weights. They lay down under the heat wrap, their skin pressed close, warming each other in a way recycled air never could. His hands moved over her ribs, tracing the smooth curve beneath her glow patterns, following the subtle rise of her breathing. She responded in kind, sliding her fingers up the base of his spine, exploring him as thoroughly as she had the broken ribs of the atrium months ago. Their hips aligned slowly. They didn't rush. Every motion asked and answered. He kissed her throat, where the glow pulsed strongest, and her hands clutched the back of his shoulders, pulling him tighter as she whispered his name without fear. When they joined, it was seamless, not hesitant, not urgent, just right. They moved together with quiet rhythm, heat building in waves, bodies finding each other not out of desperation, but affirmation. Her breath caught with each rise, her eyes locked on his, never breaking contact. Their connection was not one of possession, but of certainty. She had offered herself once out of survival. Now, she offered herself out of choice. He took her not as someone in need of saving, but as a partner, a woman, a lover. Their bodies rocked beneath the warmth of layered blankets, movements steady and natural, breath sinking as the slow rise of intimacy peaked. He held her when she trembled. She kissed his jaw when he gasped against her collarbone. And when it was over, when her limbs finally loosened and their skin shone with shared sweat and heat, they stayed tangled together, heartbeats quiet but aligned. He brushed a lock of damp, white hair from her forehead. She ran a finger down the center of his chest, tracing the light scar from the spore collapse weeks ago. Neither spoke for a long time. Then, Arisa said, "This wasn't a reward." "No," Callan replied. "It was a beginning." She nodded, curled into him, and closed her eyes. The vines in the atrium continued to grow. Corliss Station, for all its decay, had not broken them. And now, together, they had built something that couldn't be traded, stolen, or shut down. Not work, not shelter, but love, chosen, proven, and warm. Forever after.